The autumn sun cast long shadows across a $40 million mansion where a secret was about to destroy 3 lives forever. What started as whispered conversations in a Greenwich estate kitchen would soon explode into the scandal that dominated headlines for months. When billionaire tech mogul Harrison Ravencroft's housekeeper Carmen Rodriguez stepped forward with her hidden pregnancy, nobody expected what his pharmaceutical heiress wife would do next. The truth? She didn't just discover the affair. She orchestrated the most calculated public humiliation in high society history. This isn't just another story about powerful men and vulnerable women. This is about a 28-year-old immigrant who dared to speak truth to power, a CEO who faced an impossible choice, and a billionaire's wife whose reaction shocked everyone, including herself. Before we dive into this incredible true story, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let me tell you how a simple dinner party became the most explosive confrontation in recent memory. Harrison Ravencroft stood in his marble office, surveying quarterly reports that confirmed what Forbes already knew. His technology empire had just crossed $15 billion in valuation. At 42, he represented the ultimate American success story, a college dropout who transformed a dorm room startup into one of the nation's most powerful tech conglomerates. Yet behind the polished exterior of his Greenwich mansion, cracks were forming that would soon shatter everything he'd built. His wife of 12 years, Mrs. Ravencroft, embodied old money elegance. The 38-year-old pharmaceutical heiress came from 3 generations of wealth, her family's fortunes stretching back to the early 1900s. Tall, sophisticated, and razor-sharp in business, she managed her own luxury real estate investments while maintaining their position in society's upper echelons. Their marriage appeared flawless to the outside world. Charity galas at the Metropolitan Museum, exclusive vacations in the Hamptons, dinner parties attended by senators and celebrities. Magazine photographers captured their picture-perfect moments, Harrison in his tailored Italian suits, his wife draped in designer gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. But perfection, especially among the ultra-wealthy, is often the most dangerous illusion of all. The $40 million estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over imported marble floors, and priceless artwork adorned walls that had witnessed countless high society gatherings. Every surface gleamed, every detail carefully maintained by an invisible army of staff who ensured the Ravencroft lifestyle never showed a single flaw. What Harrison didn't realize was that invisibility could be deceptive, and that the most profound disruptions often came from the most unexpected places. Among that invisible army of staff was Carmen Rodriguez, a 28-year-old woman who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being seen but never truly noticed. Every morning at 6 a.m., she moved through the Ravencroft mansion with practiced efficiency, her footsteps silent on the marble floors as she maintained the illusion of effortless luxury. What the Ravencrofts didn't know was that Carmen observed everything, every private phone call, every tense moment between husband and wife, every crack in their seemingly perfect marriage. Carmen had arrived from El Salvador with hopes of building a better life, and in many ways, she had succeeded. The modest apartment above the detached garage felt palatial compared to the cramped conditions she'd left behind. Her monthly salary, carefully budgeted, allowed her to send substantial support home to her aging mother and 3 younger siblings, while still maintaining her dignity in a foreign country. Mrs. Ravencroft had developed a peculiar relationship with their housekeeper, never outright cruel but wielding casual dismissiveness like a finely sharpened weapon. "Carmen, the guest bathroom needs attention again," she would announce without glancing up from her phone. "Use the expensive products this time. We can't have water spots when the ambassador visits tonight." The truth was that Mrs. Ravencroft saw Carmen exactly as she saw the marble floors or crystal chandeliers, beautiful, functional, and completely replaceable. Carmen would nod silently, complete the task flawlessly, then repeat the process when inevitable complaints arose. She had learned that in wealthy households, perfection wasn't the goal. Demonstrating your place in the hierarchy was. Every request was really a reminder of who belonged and who simply served. Yet as Harrison struggled with the isolation that success had brought him, he remained completely unaware that salvation and destruction moved through his house each day, cleaning away the evidence of his emptiness while carrying secrets that would soon change everything. The night everything changed started with Harrison's return from a brutal 10-day business trip across 3 continents. His private jet had touched down at Westchester County Airport at nearly 11 p.m., and by the time his driver delivered him to the estate, exhaustion weighed on him like lead. Mrs. Ravencroft was attending a week-long pharmaceutical conference in Switzerland, leaving the mansion feeling eerily hollow despite its grandeur. What Harrison didn't realize was that loneliness and vulnerability create the perfect conditions for the most dangerous kinds of connections. At midnight, he found himself wandering through the kitchen, searching desperately for something, anything, that didn't require a personal chef to prepare. The gleaming appliances and imported marble countertops suddenly felt like exhibits in a museum of his own isolation. Jet lag had scrambled his internal clock, but hunger was universal. As he stood there, frustrated and slightly embarrassed by his inability to function in his own home, soft footsteps approached from the servants' quarters. Carmen appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion from her apartment above the garage. "Mr. Ravencroft? I heard movement and wanted to ensure everything was all right," she said gently, genuine concern replacing her usual careful politeness. For the first time in 3 years, Harrison truly looked at Carmen Rodriguez. Without the usual employer-employee boundaries of daytime interactions, she seemed more approachable, more human. Her eyes held real worry, not the calculated deference she typically displayed. "I'm just hungry," Harrison admitted, feeling foolish. "I can't seem to make anything work properly." Carmen smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face. "Please sit, Mr. Ravencroft. Let me prepare something for you," as she moved through the kitchen with natural grace, preparing a simple meal while Harrison found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone. Neither realized they were crossing lines that would soon destroy everything they'd built in their separate worlds. This revision removes the potentially problematic description while maintaining the narrative flow and emotional connection that's important for the story development. Over the following months, these midnight encounters became Harrison's most anticipated moments. Each time he returned from business trips or late board meetings, he found himself hoping Carmen would hear his footsteps in the kitchen. Their conversations evolved from simple pleasantries to genuine exchanges about dreams, fears, and the isolation that success had brought him. What neither realized was that emotional intimacy can be far more dangerous than any physical attraction. Carmen spoke about her family in El Salvador, her mother's arthritis, her youngest brother's academic achievements, her sister's wedding plans. Harrison shared stories about his childhood in Detroit before his parents' restaurant franchise made them wealthy, his struggles with imposter syndrome despite his billions, and his unexpected love for classical music. Mrs. Ravencroft remained completely unaware of these developments. Her calendar was packed with charity galas, real estate ventures, and maintaining the social connections that kept their family positioned among America's elite. She rarely asked about Harrison's increasingly frequent late nights or his newfound interest in learning Spanish, which he claimed was for expanding business into Latin American markets. The transformation was gradual, but undeniable. Harrison began scheduling meetings specifically so he could return when his wife would be away. He installed language learning apps on his phone and practiced Spanish phrases during conference calls. Carmen started taking extra care with the evening meals she prepared, even when the family chef was scheduled to work. The most profound betrayals often begin with the simple human need to be truly understood by another person. Their conversations revealed how differently they viewed the world, Harrison spoke about the pressure of managing thousands of employees and making decisions that affected entire communities. Carmen shared her perspective on watching wealthy families from the outside, understanding their vulnerabilities while remaining invisible to their daily lives. Neither acknowledged what was happening between them. They told themselves these were simply friendly conversations between employer and employee. But when Harrison's hand accidentally brushed Carmen's while reaching for coffee, when their eyes lingered a moment too long during discussions, when comfortable silences stretched between them filled with unspoken understanding, both knew they were crossing boundaries that could never be uncrossed. The mansion's security cameras captured everything, though neither thought about the silent watchers recording their growing closeness. The night their relationship fundamentally changed started with Harrison returning from the most difficult board meeting of his career. Hostile investors had questioned every decision he'd made over the past year, threatening to remove him from his own company. Mrs. Ravencroft was in Paris for Fashion Week, and the empty mansion felt like a monument to his professional loneliness. Sometimes the most life-changing moments happen when people are at their most vulnerable. Carmen found him in the library at nearly 2 a.m., surrounded by family photographs that seemed to mock him with their artificial happiness. His usual confident demeanor had completely crumbled, replaced by raw exhaustion and self-doubt. "You look troubled, Mr. Ravencroft," Carmen said softly, setting down a cup of coffee beside his chair. "Just Harrison, please," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm tired of titles and formalities." When she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, he looked up into her eyes and saw genuine compassion, not the calculated sympathy he received from business associates or the distracted concern from his wife. For the first time in years, someone was truly present with him in his moment of crisis. "Tell me what's wrong," Carmen said, sitting in the chair across from him. What followed was the most honest conversation Harrison had experienced in decades. He spoke about feeling trapped by his own success, about the isolation that wealth had created, about his fear that he was becoming someone he didn't recognize. Carmen listened without judgment, offering perspectives shaped by her own experiences with struggle and resilience. When Harrison finally looked at Carmen that night, really looked at her as a woman rather than an employee, both of them understood that everything was about to change. The moment their eyes met with complete honesty, when his hand covered hers and she didn't pull away, when she leaned closer to offer comfort that transcended their different worlds, they crossed a line that would alter multiple lives forever. What happened next was inevitable, emotional, and completely wrong by every social standard that governed their separate existences. For 6 weeks, Harrison and Carmen existed in a carefully constructed bubble of stolen moments and whispered conversations. They both understood the impossibility of their situation: a billionaire CEO and his housekeeper, a marriage to one of America's most influential families, social boundaries that had existed for generations. But the most carefully guarded secrets have a way of revealing themselves at the worst possible moments. Carmen's missed period arrived like a thunderclap in their hidden world. The pregnancy test she purchased at a pharmacy 3 towns away confirmed her deepest fears and most impossible hopes. As she stared at the positive result, she felt her entire world shifting beneath her feet. Carmen made a decision that would haunt her for months. She chose to hide the pregnancy from Harrison completely. She convinced herself it was the right choice. What good would telling him do? He was married to one of America's most powerful women. His company was worth billions. A scandal would destroy everything he'd built, and she would be painted as the scheming immigrant who seduced her wealthy employer. For 2 months, Carmen successfully concealed her condition. Loose clothing became her armor. She claimed stomach illness to explain her morning sickness. She carefully positioned herself during their rare encounters to hide the growing evidence of their relationship. Mrs. Ravencroft, consumed with launching a new luxury real estate venture, noticed nothing unusual about their housekeeper's behavior. But Harrison was more observant than Carmen realized. He began noticing subtle changes that set off alarm bells in his mind. The way she turned slightly when he entered a room, how she held cleaning supplies against her body, the loose-fitting uniforms that had replaced her usual professional attire. It was the careful positioning that finally made him suspicious. During one of their midnight encounters, Harrison noticed how Carmen kept the kitchen island between them, how she angled her body away from him when she thought he wasn't looking. The woman who had once been comfortable in his presence now seemed to be hiding something significant. The confrontation came on a quiet Thursday evening when Mrs. Ravencroft was attending a pharmaceutical conference in Miami. Harrison found Carmen in the library, carefully dusting bookshelves while keeping her back to the room. "How long?" he asked quietly, making her freeze with the cloth in her hands. Carmen's face went pale. She didn't need to ask what he meant. "Harrison, how long have you been carrying my child without telling me?" Tears streamed down her face as she turned to face him. 2 months. I was planning to leave next month. I have applications for positions in California. You would never have known." Harrison felt like he'd been struck. "You were going to take my child away forever? I was protecting you. Your marriage, your company, everything you built would be destroyed if this came out. I couldn't do that to you." "That wasn't your choice to make," Harrison said, his voice breaking with emotion. "That was my child, my responsibility, my decision to face the consequences." But even as he spoke those words, they both understood the impossibility of their situation. His solution was elaborate and desperate. Carmen would quietly relocate with a substantial financial package that ensured she and their child lived comfortably while maintaining complete secrecy. He would purchase a house in Vermont under a shell company, establish a trust fund, and visit whenever possible. Carmen agreed because she recognized the harsh reality. The man she'd fallen in love with existed only in midnight conversations. The billionaire CEO who could destroy her reputation with a single word was the person she faced every morning. For the next month, Carmen continued successfully hiding her pregnancy. The Vermont arrangement gave her hope for the future, but loose clothing, careful positioning, and claims of ongoing stomach illness still explained away her condition. Mrs. Ravencroft remained completely unaware of their housekeeper's situation or her husband's secret arrangements. But secrets in wealthy households rarely remain buried, especially when those secrets threaten the very foundations of power and privilege. The security cameras that Harrison had installed throughout the mansion for protection became the instruments of their exposure. Detective Ray Morrison, hired by Mrs. Ravencroft's father for routine security audits, noticed patterns in the footage that raised immediate questions. What the detective discovered would ignite the most explosive scandal in high society history: late-night meetings between the billionaire and his housekeeper, extended conversations in private areas of the house, intimate moments that looked decidedly unprofessional. Morrison compiled everything into a comprehensive report that would destroy multiple lives. Mrs. Ravencroft's father, Reginald Pemberton, represented old-money aristocracy at its most calculating. When Morrison presented his findings, Reginald saw not just personal betrayal, but a direct threat to the family's reputation and vast financial empire. His daughter's marriage to Harrison wasn't merely romantic. It was a strategic alliance worth billions in combined assets. The confrontation came on a December morning when Carmen was 4 months pregnant. Mrs. Ravencroft had returned early from a business trip to find Morrison's report waiting on her desk. Security footage, photographs, and a timeline that painted an undeniable picture of her husband's relationship with their domestic worker. Mrs. Ravencroft's reaction wasn't the explosive rage one might expect, but something far more dangerous, a cold, calculating fury that her privileged upbringing had taught her to channel into devastating action. She said nothing to Harrison about her discovery. Instead, she began planning with the methodical precision that had made her a successful businesswoman, consulting lawyers, private investigators, and public relations specialists. Mrs. Ravencroft's revenge was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. She arranged a surprise dinner party for Harrison's birthday, inviting their most influential friends and business partners, senators, CEOs, media moguls, and social elite, who represented the pinnacle of American wealth and power. What she planned for that evening would shock everyone present and change the trajectory of 3 lives forever. She specifically arranged for Carmen to work that evening, serving the guests who embodied everything their housekeeper could never hope to access. As Carmen moved through the dining room with practiced invisibility, serving champagne to people whose annual income exceeded her lifetime earnings, Mrs. Ravencroft watched with predatory patience. The guest list was strategic. Every person present had significant influence in business, politics, or media. Harrison's company board members were there, along with major investors and clients. The evening represented the perfect storm of witnesses who could either destroy or validate reputations with a single conversation. Mrs. Ravencroft waited until the evening reached its peak. Harrison was giving a toast about family values and the importance of trust in business relationships when she decided to strike. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her husband speaking about trust while his pregnant housekeepers served wine to their most important associates. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Ravencroft announced, her voice cutting through the conversation like crystal breaking, "I have a birthday surprise for my dear husband that I think you'll all find absolutely illuminating." The room fell silent as she moved to stand beside Carmen, who had frozen with a tray of empty glasses in her hands. With theatrical precision that would have impressed Broadway directors, Mrs. Ravencroft placed her hand on Carmen's small but noticeable bump. "It seems my husband has been busy creating his own family values," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "With our housekeeper—" The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt eternal to everyone present. Harrison's face drained of all color as he watched his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Carmen stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the most powerful people in America who were now staring at her like a fascinating specimen. But Mrs. Ravencroft wasn't finished with her calculated destruction. Phones appeared instantly. The soft buzz of notifications filled the air as 50% of America's most powerful people began documenting what would become the scandal of the decade. Senator Williams discreetly activated her recording app. Media executives recognized a story that would dominate headlines for months, but the real explosion was just beginning, and it wouldn't come from the guests. 4 months pregnant, Mrs. Ravencroft continued, her voice slicing through the rising whispers. "With my husband's child, while living under our roof, accepting our generosity and betraying our trust at every turn." The accusation transformed the room's energy completely. Suddenly, every guest was leaning forward, hungry for more details. This wasn't just dinner theater. This was the kind of raw drama that would fuel gossip columns and business journals for years. Carmen finally found her voice, though it emerged shakily. "Mrs. Ravencroft, please what?" She cut her off with surgical precision. "Please continue hiding the fact that you deliberately pursued my husband? Please pretend you weren't planning to use this pregnancy to destroy our marriage and secure your financial future?" With those words, Mrs. Ravencroft had masterfully reframed the entire narrative, transforming Carmen from victim into predator in the minds of everyone present. The guests' expressions shifted visibly. What had initially appeared to be a powerful man taking advantage of his vulnerable employee now looked like something entirely different. Mrs. Ravencroft's version painted Carmen as the architect of her own situation, a calculating woman who had identified the perfect target. Board member Jonathan Sterling cleared his throat meaningfully. 3 major investors exchanged glances that spoke volumes about Harrison's future with the company. The pharmaceutical heiress had just weaponized every stereotype about ambitious immigrants and gold-digging women. Harrison stood paralyzed in the center of his own dining room, watching his wife orchestrate his professional destruction, while painting herself as the wronged party. Every second of his silence made him look weaker, more culpable. But what happened next would surprise everyone in that room, including Mrs. Ravencroft herself. Carmen straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears, and looked directly at the woman who had just tried to destroy her character in front of the most influential people in America. The quiet housekeeper, who had cleaned up after these people for 3 years, was about to remind them that dignity couldn't be bought, sold, or taken away by someone else's accusations. What happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Mrs. Ravencroft herself. Carmen, who had spent 3 years accepting condescension and dismissal, who had endured months of hiding her pregnancy in fear and shame, who had been painted as a gold-digging manipulator in front of America's elite, finally reached her breaking point. The quiet housekeeper who had cleaned up after these people for years was about to teach them a lesson about dignity and truth. "I didn't seduce anyone," Carmen said, her voice growing stronger with each word as she turned to face the room full of powerful faces. "Your husband pursued me. Your husband told me about his loneliness. Your husband said he loved me." The gasps from the assembled guests were audible. A housekeeper was contradicting a billionaire's wife in front of senators, CEOs, and media moguls. The social hierarchy that governed their world was being challenged by someone they considered invisible. But Carmen wasn't finished. She turned to face Harrison directly, her eyes blazing with a courage that surprised everyone present. "And you," she continued, pointing at the man who had whispered promises in Spanish while sharing his deepest fears. "You're going to stand there and let her destroy me to protect yourself?" Harrison stood at the crossroads of reputation and conscience, with 50 of the most influential people in America, waiting to see which path he would choose. The silence stretched until even the servers had stopped moving. Mrs. Ravencroft's carefully orchestrated humiliation had backfired. Instead of destroying Carmen's credibility, Harrison's silence was destroying his own character in front of everyone who mattered in his professional life. "Carmen is telling the truth," Harrison said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "I pursued her. I developed feelings for her. And yes, the child she's carrying is mine." The admission sent another shockwave through the gathered crowd. Victoria's plan to publicly humiliate Carmen had just resulted in her husband validating the housekeeper's story in front of 50 witnesses who controlled billions in assets and wielded enormous social influence. But what Mrs. Ravencroft did next would prove that the battle was far from over. Instead of the rage or devastation one might expect, Mrs. Ravencroft smiled, a cold, calculated expression that sent chills through everyone who saw it. She had anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. "How touching," she said with icy precision. "My husband defending his pregnant mistress in front of our closest friends. I'm sure this will make fascinating reading in tomorrow's newspapers." As she spoke, several guests were already uploading photos and videos to social media. #Ravencroft scandal was about to trend worldwide. Mrs. Ravencroft's response was swift and brutal. Within hours of the disastrous dinner party, she had activated a network of publicists, lawyers, and media contacts to control the narrative spinning out of control across social media platforms. What she unleashed next would prove that in the world of billionaire scandals, the first story told is rarely the true story. By morning, the scandal had been completely reframed. Carmen wasn't a vulnerable employee taken advantage of by her powerful employer. She was a calculating foreign domestic worker who had deliberately seduced a naive billionaire to secure American citizenship and financial gain. Immigration status, class warfare, and gender dynamics all became weapons in a carefully orchestrated media campaign. The story exploded across social media like wildfire. #Maid scandal trended globally as millions of people debated whether Carmen was victim or villain. Metro news shows dissected every angle. Immigration advocates clashed with those who saw the story as confirmation of their worst stereotypes. Mrs. Ravencroft had weaponized American prejudices against immigrant women, transforming a story of workplace abuse into a tale of foreign manipulation. The business consequences were immediate and devastating. Harrison's technology company stock plummeted as investors questioned his judgment and character. Board members called emergency meetings to discuss leadership changes. Major clients began distancing themselves from the controversy, unwilling to associate their brands with such explosive scandal. Meanwhile, Carmen found herself thrust into a media spotlight she never wanted. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. Her family in El Salvador faced harassment from journalists seeking background information. Her quiet life had been completely destroyed by forces beyond her control. This next part will absolutely blow your mind. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next changes everything. But Mrs. Ravenscroft had underestimated one crucial factor: the American public's appetite for complex narratives. Instead of universal condemnation of Carmen, the story split along predictable lines. Some saw her, as Harrison described, a working-class woman victimized by a powerful employer who then abandoned her when convenient. The battle for public opinion had begun, but neither side anticipated the intervention that would soon transform this scandal into something completely unexpected. What no one anticipated was the intervention of Senator Patricia Williams, Mrs. Ravenscroft's godmother, and one of the most powerful women in American politics. At 73, Senator Williams had navigated 6 decades of political scandals, social upheavals, and personal tragedies that had taught her to see beyond surface narratives and media manipulation. The senator's arrival at the Ravenscroft mansion 3 days after the explosive dinner party would change the trajectory of everyone's lives in ways none of them could imagine. She requested a private meeting with all parties involved: Harrison, Mrs. Ravenscroft, Carmen, and their various legal representatives. The library that had once witnessed whispered conversations between Harrison and Carmen now hosted a gathering that would determine the future of their unborn child. "I've seen this story before," Senator Williams began, her voice carrying the authority of decades in public service. "Powerful man, vulnerable woman, pregnancy, public humiliation. It's as old as humanity itself. But the ending doesn't have to follow the same destructive pattern." She turned to Mrs. Ravenscroft first, her expression sharp with disappointment. "You've successfully destroyed your husband's reputation and traumatized a young woman who was already in an impossible situation. What exactly have you accomplished beyond making yourself look vindictive? Then to Harrison, you've admitted to the relationship but done nothing meaningful to protect the woman carrying your child. Your confession was brave but meaningless without concrete action to support her." Finally, she addressed Carmen directly in fluent Spanish, speaking privately for several minutes while the others waited in tense silence. What she said to Carmen would remain between them, but when the conversation ended, Carmen was crying. Not from shame this time, but from relief at finally finding someone who saw her as a human being rather than a political pawn. "Here's what's going to happen," Senator Williams announced, turning back to the group. "You're all going to stop thinking about your reputations, your social standing, and your wounded pride. You're going to start considering that innocent child who didn't ask to be born into this mess." The solution she proposed next would be unprecedented in the world of billionaire scandals and would shock everyone who thought they understood how these situations typically resolved. The framework Senator Williams outlined challenged every conventional approach to wealthy family scandals. Instead of the typical pattern of payoffs, non-disclosure agreements, and exile, she suggested radical transparency coupled with genuine responsibility. What she proposed next would either heal the fractured families or destroy them completely. Harrison would publicly acknowledge his relationship with Carmen and accept full responsibility for their situation. More importantly, he would establish a substantial trust fund, not as hush money or guilt payment, but as genuine child support that recognized his parental obligations. Carmen would receive comprehensive health care, educational funding, and housing assistance, while maintaining her dignity and decision-making power regarding their child's future. Mrs. Ravenscroft faced a choice: pursue a destructive divorce that would drag all parties through years of litigation, or accept a generous settlement that would maintain her lifestyle while allowing her to rebuild her reputation through meaningful philanthropic work. The senator suggested focusing on immigrant workers' rights and domestic abuse prevention, areas where Mrs. Ravenscroft's experience could create genuine positive impact. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the woman who had weaponized prejudice against immigrant workers might now become their advocate. Carmen would relocate to a comfortable home in a supportive community, with resources to complete her interrupted education and build a stable life for her child. Most importantly, she would never be required to hide her relationship with Harrison or apologize for the circumstances of her pregnancy. This approach serves everyone's long-term interests, Senator Williams explained. Harrison maintains his business relationships while accepting responsibility. Mrs. Ravencroft transforms a personal betrayal into public service. Carmen receives support without sacrificing her autonomy or dignity. The media strategy was equally unconventional. Rather than trying to suppress the story, they would control it through carefully managed disclosure. Harrison would give a single comprehensive interview explaining his actions and outlining his commitments to both families. Mrs. Ravencroft would announce her new foundation simultaneously, demonstrating her choice to move forward constructively. Carmen would have the option to speak publicly or remain private, with her wishes respected completely. The alternative, Senator Williams concluded, is years of legal battles, continued media exploitation, and a child who grows up knowing he was the center of a public relations war rather than the reason 3 adults chose to be better people. The room fell silent as each person considered a future none of them had imagined possible. 6 months later, baby Gabriel Harrison Rodriguez was born in a private hospital room surrounded by an unconventional but loving extended family. Harrison held his son for the first time while Carmen recovered, both understanding that this child represented hope rather than scandal. What happened next surprised everyone who had followed the story from the beginning. Mrs. Ravencroft visited the hospital, bringing gifts and flowers. Her presence wasn't warmly welcomed, but it represented something more important: adults choosing their child's future over past grievances. Her relationship with Carmen would never be close, but it had evolved into mutual respect between 2 women who had survived a crisis that could have destroyed them both. The media coverage of Gabriel's birth was extensive, but notably different from the scandal reporting. Photographs of Harrison holding his son, Carmen smiling proudly despite her exhaustion, and Mrs. Ravencroft leaving the hospital with dignity painted a portrait of people who had found a way to prioritize a child's well-being over their own wounded feelings. Harrison's business had indeed suffered initially. Stock prices dropped, board meetings were tense, and some clients distanced themselves from the controversy. However, his handling of the aftermath gradually restored confidence. His commitment to transparency and responsibility, while unconventional, demonstrated character traits that some investors found more valuable than a spotless reputation. The business world discovered that genuine accountability could be more valuable than perfect public relations. Mrs. Ravencroft's foundation supporting immigrant workers' rights launched to significant media attention. Her transformation from someone who had exploited prejudices into an advocate for vulnerable populations became a powerful redemption narrative. Carmen served on the advisory board, their working relationship proving that women could move beyond betrayal toward shared purpose. Carmen enrolled in business school, her tuition funded by Gabriel's trust. She remained in Connecticut, living in a beautiful home where her son could grow up knowing both of his parents. Her relationship with Harrison had evolved into genuine friendship based on their shared commitment to Gabriel's happiness rather than the emotional connection that had created their crisis. 1 year after the scandal that captivated America, the Ravencroft story had become something unexpected, a case study in how wealthy, powerful families could handle private crises with public dignity. What made their story unique wasn't the affair itself. Wealthy men having relationships with employees was hardly unprecedented, but how all parties chose to handle the consequences. In business schools across the country, the Ravencroft case was taught as an example of crisis management that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term damage control. Law schools examined the innovative settlement structure that protected all parties while serving the child's best interests. Ethics courses used the story to discuss responsibility, power dynamics, and the possibility of redemption. Carmen had completed her first year of business school with honors while raising Gabriel. Her transformation from invisible housekeeper to educated single mother demonstrated the power of genuine support systems. She spoke occasionally at immigration advocacy events, sharing her story to help other women in similar situations. Harrison learned that being a father to Gabriel required different skills than running a technology company, but both roles taught him about responsibility, sacrifice, and the difference between public success and private fulfillment. His business had not only recovered but expanded, with his reputation for handling personal crisis with integrity, actually attracting new clients who valued ethical leadership. Mrs. Ravencroft discovered that her greatest victory wasn't destroying the people who had betrayed her, but finding ways to transform her pain into purpose. Her foundation had helped hundreds of immigrant families navigate legal challenges and workplace exploitation. Working with Carmen on these initiatives had taught her that strength could come from forgiveness rather than revenge. The three adults had learned that the most radical choice in any scandal is prioritizing a child's welfare above adult pride and public perception. Gabriel grew up in a world where his existence was celebrated rather than hidden, where his mixed heritage was honored rather than shameful, and where the adults in his life had chosen to write a different ending to a familiar story about power, vulnerability, and unexpected consequences. The Ravencroft scandal became legendary not for the affair itself, but for what happened afterward. In a culture that typically demanded clear victims and villains, their story offered a different narrative: flawed people making complex choices, accepting responsibility for their actions, and prioritizing a child's future over their own reputations. The most shocking element of their story wasn't the betrayal, the public humiliation, or even the media frenzy. It was what came next. Carmen Rodriguez never became the wealthy woman that tabloids claimed she was scheming to become, but she became something more valuable: an educated, empowered mother who could look her son in the eyes and tell him truthfully that his parents had chosen love over scandal, responsibility over revenge, and his future over their past mistakes. Harrison Ravencroft learned that true power wasn't the ability to control other people's lives or protect his reputation at any cost, but the courage to accept consequences for his choices and build something positive from the wreckage of his errors. Mrs. Ravencroft discovered that her greatest strength lay not in destroying her enemies but in transforming personal pain into public service that helped other women facing impossible situations. In the end, the maid caught hiding her pregnancy from the billionaire CEO, and what his heiress wife did next shocked everyone, not with cruelty or calculated revenge, but with the radical choice of placing a child's welfare above adult wounded pride. If this incredible true story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales of ordinary people in extraordinary situations. Drop a comment telling me what you think about how they handled this impossible situation, and check out this next unbelievable story. And in a small Connecticut town, little Gabriel plays in a garden where three adults who once nearly destroyed each other learn to build something better. A family defined not by traditional boundaries, but by shared commitment to his happiness and the hope that love, responsibility, and forgiveness can triumph over the most complicated circumstances.